Eureka, right?
Yeah.
So folks, we are live on YouTube and we can go ahead and start. Dr. Sullivan.
Very good. We'll jump in, and just a couple of quick comments as it relates to a streaming meeting. I'd like to welcome you to the December meeting of the LCTCS Board of Supervisors Audit Committee. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I will ask Ms. Sarah Kleinpeter to go over a few points, given that we are holding a virtual meeting of the board and live streaming to YouTube. Ms. Kleinpeter?
Yes, sir. Happy to do so. As Dr. Sullivan reminded you guys that we are doing a live stream, and so please be mindful of that. Those who are joining by remote access are asked to keep yourselves on mute and during the meeting and use the raise hand feature. When recognized to speak, unmute yourself and give it a few seconds before you make comments so that your audio catches up with your video. If you have trouble with technology at any point, please call or text me on my cell phone. You may view board items via the links posted on the LCTCS website, www.lctcs.edu. We will conduct a roll call vote at the start of the meeting, and each motion will require a roll call vote for approval. Members, please state your name when making a motion, and motions must be made via sound and not gesture. Public comments may be made during today's meeting via the open conference call line at 877-810-9415, access code 6499147#. That information is in the notice of the meeting posted on the LCTCS website. Any public comments received will be read during the meeting by the board secretary or a designee, and all public comments must be made in an agenda item number, a name, and a brief statement. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per comment. The meeting will need to adjourn no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to accommodate the timely start of the 10 a.m. board meeting. And Mr. Chairman, the order is now yours.
All right, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn to you.
Hold on one second. Craig, you are on mute right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Tara, would you, we need to do the roll call first, is that right?
So we'll go ahead and have you call the meeting to order. And then before we do the roll call, we'll appoint Tara as member of the committee.
Okay, well, the August 12th, 2020 LCTS Board of Supervisors Audit Committee meeting is now called to order. And I would ask Tara if she would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes, everybody please stand and place your hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bradford.
Sarah,
Yes.
Greg is hard to hear. I don't know if you can do anything about that or he needs to.
I may be able to do something about it. Let me get the roll call started and I'll work on that while we're
Okay.
Certainly. And Mr. Chairman, as we stated before, for purposes of this meeting, we will appoint Tara Mitchell as a member of the committee today. And we thank her for joining us. This is a roll call vote. Supervisor Spahn is here. Supervisor Mount is here. Supervisor Bradford.
Present.
Supervisor Carter is not with us yet. Supervisor Hardy, Roman is here.
Yep.
Supervisor Salath.
Here.
Supervisor Price.
Here.
And Supervisor Mitchell.
Here's Sarah.
Fantastic. We do have a quorum of the meeting, of the members present. And I believe before I get further on,
to switch right quick. I'm going to leave this meeting here, or I'll leave it on.
Mr. Price, could you, at the beginning of the meeting for the board meeting, you have a statement to say under the approval of the agenda? Would you be able to say that for this purpose? Oh, never mind, we do not approve the agenda here.
Okay, so just,
Stand by.
I can do that.
Okay, Sarah. Wow, hold on.
So Craig, what you'll need to do is mute your other device.
Is that what you call Craig squared? Is that it? We're got twice the daily allowance of Craig Spawn today, right?
If you don't get it right, we're gonna put it on Craig's list.
Hey, Miss Helen, is that you calling in from your home phone number?
Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. I'm happy to have you join us, and I will note for the record that you are present for this meeting.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, tell her we on Zoom too now.
We on Zoom too. At least, Sarah.
Yes, ma'am. You're on Zoom by phone, though, not by video. Is that correct?
Supervisor Mount, is that better?
Much better. Yes, sir.
Sorry about that.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Well, I walked away for a minute and a lot of people showed up.
We want to do Zoom. Are we on Zoom?
You are on Zoom by your phone, Miss Helen.
We're waiting on the meeting. Okay.
The meeting is started, and we are live on YouTube right now. And we've done the roll call vote, but that's as much as you've missed, so you're just on time.
And tell what she said.
And so, Sarah, you've called roll. We have a quorum.
We do.
The next order of business would be to request a motion to approve the last minutes meetings. The last meeting minutes, excuse me.
So move.
The motion by Ms. Mount. Is it second by Mr. Salah?
So all in favor?
Aye.
Go through on a roll call. Okay.
We will have to do a roll call vote. Yes, sir. So Supervisor Spawn,
Yes.
Supervisor Mount,
Yes.
Supervisor Bradford,
Yes,
Supervisor Carter. Ms. Helen, do you approve those minutes?
Yes.
Supervisor Roman Hardy,
Yeah, sorry, couldn't find the mute button.
okay. Supervisor Salah,
Yes.
Supervisor Price,
Yes, ma'am.
and Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you,
I
Sarah.
approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'd like to ask Michael Redmond to take us through the internal audit reports. Michael, I didn't see anything of great significance in there, but I'd appreciate it if you'd take us through that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. I appreciate seeing everyone this morning. I hope everyone's safe and well. Since our last audit committee meeting, the internal audit department has issued 2 reports, and the legislative auditors have issued 2 reports. The 2 reports that I issued and one of the legislative auditor reports pretty much addressed the same issue, and that has to do with the recording and tracking of fixed assets. The 2 internal audit reports, one for South Louisiana Community College and one for Central Louisiana Technical Community College, these were both begun in the last fiscal year, near the end of the fiscal year. but they had to be put on hold as the work from home and closing of the campuses came into effect, because they required our access to those campuses in order to complete. We have been able to complete those now. What we were doing there is testing and verifying the fixed asset certification that is reported to the Louisiana Property Assistance Agency, the LPAA. We did issue a couple of findings on those two, and one of the audits that the legislative auditor issued, the one for North Shore Technical Community College, also had a finding related to the recording of fixed assets in the LPAA database. And I'm talking about these three together because they really address the same issue. In one case, we had in Central, we had an issue where we selected a large sample and we would go to find those assets, and they weren't where they were supposed to be according to the LPAA listing. We found them, but in many cases, they weren't where they were supposed to be. In other cases, we found assets that had not been tagged. And in the case of North Shore Technical Community College, they had a lot of assets that they had not recorded into the database timely. Not that they didn't record it, it's that they didn't do it within a particular, what the legislative auditor considered timely. Now, these are really just procedural items. In our case, we didn't, if something wasn't where it was supposed to be, we went looking for it, and in almost all cases we found them. But the reason we wrote it up is because we want our colleges to get this database cleaned up, because when the legislative auditors go out there, or when the LPAA auditors themselves go out there, they're not going to take the time to go hunting for them. So if something is supposed to be in building A, and you say, oh, it's not here in building A. Well, where is it? Well, we moved it to campus Y. Well, they're not going to go hunting for it in campus Y. It says it's supposed to be here. It's not here. That's an issue. And my concern is, if this is how we get those big accumulation of assets that wind up being quote unlocated assets that have to be carried. We took the time to go find them, and if they clean up their databases, then this number can drop. This listing of unlocated assets can be reduced. So we have suggested that these colleges be more timely in their tagging, be more timely in their recording of changes to the location, because one of the, we had a large sample, and then we had a large number of these dislocated or untagged items. So if our sample error rate is large, the chances are the entire database may be in this condition. So we have encouraged the colleges to perform a more detailed review to get this database cleaned up. Again, this is procedural. This doesn't affect the bottom line, but it will hopefully alleviate findings from either the legislative auditor or the LPAA auditors themselves. As far as projects that we currently have in process, we've got 3 projects that we're currently working on. We're wrapping up one. The other of the 2 projects that we carried over from the previous year was establishing a compliance baseline. We're finishing that up, and hopefully by our next audit committee meeting, we'll have a review on that. We'll have the report out before that, but we can talk about it at the next meeting. We've also begun a vendor management and payments review. It's been a few years since we've done any kind of review of our vendor database and how things are managed to establish new vendors, payment of vendors, things like that. And with the increase in remote work and remote learning, we've initiated a remote access controls review. At our last meeting, we talked about that being on our audit plan for the year. And I think the board was very interested in seeing that. We've had to buy new assets, deliver them to students, deliver them to staff. They're working from home. How are the controls being managed for accessing of our databases, not doing personal work on these things? How are we going to get them back? All these types of controls that would ordinarily be in place for assets on site. But now these assets are off site and they're being used in different ways. So we're initiating a review of that. Hopefully we'll make some progress on that in the next few months. And it's a short report, but Mr. Chairman, that's what we have. And in the next minute or two, Joe can cover the other legislative auditor report that was issued. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Are there any questions for Michael?
Perhaps if I can, let me weigh in on the property issue. As I think this board is aware, we have been in development of our own property control database. Part of the challenge here is the submission of data to the LPAA property control database, receiving of equipment when you're building a campus. This is the North Shore example, right? When you receive equipment for a nursing lab at North Shore and the equipment is not available to be installed as yet because the building is not ready, but yet the auditor requirements are that you record it first. Well, I'm not going to record a piece of property into LPAA when I don't know whether it is exactly what I've ordered, right? So taking property control. So we have been in the process of trying to develop our own internal LCTCS property control system that would then, once you hit a button, it will communicate that information to LPAA. I don't want to be in a position where the auditors can play got you with this, because that's exactly what's happening. This is, if you think about it, the three campuses that Mike has just referenced, Central, North Shore, and South Louisiana Community College, all three have one thing in common. They all built new buildings and moved into new buildings in the midst of this. And so it is tough to try to keep up with property going from one place to another. Meanwhile, you have new equipment coming in. So we are working on ways to try to get better at this, but I want to be really clear. There's nothing in anything that was just described that says we have lost a piece of equipment.
Right.
That's a really important distinction. When you read a headline that says not able to be located, that's different than lost or stolen. And this is a really key distinction. We don't even want there to be a question mark around our ability to keep up with our property. So Mike, appreciate your team's work and appreciate your help in trying to make us better in this regard. And certainly we are making progress, but there's still work to be done, surely.
Monty, or Michael, just a quick question for me. The sort of logistics managed part that you just described, have you evaluated using third parties to manage that? I know a lot of people are starting to carve that out as a different way to be taken care of.
So we have looked at that as a part of our facility planning process and our relationship with CSRS. What typically we find is having a local campus dean who understands how that college is going to use the equipment, how they're going to use the facility, tends to be a better way for us to keep up with the equipment, just out of a sense of ownership by that campus dean. And unfortunately, we don't have that at every location. So in some instances, we have looked at having a third party do that on our behalf. And in this case, CSRS has played that role in several locations. But it varies across campuses, but that's a great suggestion to consider at a more systemic kind of level.
Thank you, Roman. Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Mr. President. That is helpful. And Michael, thank you for that report. Joe, would you take us through the legislative audit reports now, please, sir?
Certainly. And just quickly before we move to that, I just would like to state I've been in contact with the CFO at North Shore, and they do have, they call it a Zebra scanner, scan and validate software that integrates with LPAA. So I know other colleges are using similar softwares where they scan and upload data into LPAA and also have a radio frequency chip tag on properties, so that instead of physically going in and visually looking for equipment, they can go into a room, activate a scanner, and within some parameter, let's say it's 15 feet to 20 feet, it will notify the user what equipment is in that room, and so they can cross-validate it against their inventory. So I just want to make that note that we have made some progress in that area. Doc, back to Supervisor Spahn, your question regarding audits. So fall through the winter months is usually the period a time frame by which legislative audits are issued. We have had a few audits issued already. Currently, since our last meeting, we've had 2 audits issued, one for North Shore Technical Community College related to property control, kind of what was touched on by Mike Redmond. This was from a build out of a campus where they purchased and received a large amount of equipment and did not timely put it into the LPAA, the state property control system. And as the audit points out, in no way, shape, or form was any equipment missing of any kind. It basically was a finding related to, again, untimely entry of equipment into the state property control database, which requires that property should be entered into the database within 60 days of receipt. With that issue put aside, the other audit that was issued was for Louisiana Delta Community College. And there were 4 findings related to the college. And to provide some perspective, as you all know, Mr. Chris Broadwater was appointed the interim chancellor of that college sometime last year, last 6 months or so, came into the college and has been working with the current CFO, who has been there roughly on an interim basis for the last 6 months as well, or longer, to rectify a lot of these issues, and has made a lot of progress on these audits findings. The findings that we have for the college relate to employee access to Banner after they were terminated. And again, that's not necessarily an issue with Banner itself. We have a automated process by which when HR terminates somebody, a script is run nightly that removes all access. So it wasn't necessarily a Banner issue. It was really an internal process issue related to the HR office. The other audit finding relates to reconciliation of fee tables and banners for students. The third, again, relates to reconciliation of data and the Banner student accounts receivables information. And I misstate, there's three findings. I'm sorry, 4. The fourth one is related to an employee entering information in Banner without independent review. Not that there was anything done that was improper. It's just that they did not have an independent review process for those. And I believe we have Mr. Broadwater and Dr. Wainwright available to answer any questions specifically on each of their audits.
Chris, would you like to offer some comments on the Delta audit findings?
Sure. So I started the last week of January of this year as interim there, and we knew that the legislative auditor would be coming in starting roughly in April. So we started then, undertook a review of prior audits and findings to review whether or not what had been proposed in the audit finding 2 years previous had been accomplished. And what we found by the first week of February was that there were multiple cases where that work had not yet been completed, largely a result of a transition from a retirement of a CFO and bringing on an interim. By the first week of March, we had resolved all issues that were in those previous findings, updated all policies. Every policy in finance was updated and posted. And so all of those issues were resolved. And when the legislative auditor came, there was nothing that surprised us. We knew that we were going to have those repeat findings, but we were confident. And as the audit turned out, to reflect those findings were noted as having been resolved. On the issue of the terminated employees' access, that was resolved. That was simply a matter of changing the HR process from post-dating the termination date to preloading that so that it would run in Banner. That's been automated and corrected. On the student fee and tuition tables, Delta was undertaking a manual process, which is just an opportunity for audit findings because of human error. So that was completely automated to remove that human component, so those tables could be applied correctly, and that has been resolved. On the issue of the accounts receivable, student accounts receivable reconciliation, when we did the deep dive on that issue, what we found was that the bursar who was responsible for that had never done it. The bursar was terminated. We hired a new bursar, and our CFO undertook the reconciliation process. The only reason that was not resolved before the audit was completed in June is that she has had to go back from the time that Banner was implemented and reconcile all of those records to the present date. So that's multiple years of reconciliations being done, and that will be resolved, completed by January 1st. And then the last issue, the only one that was a surprise to us that we did not know was going to be an issue, was the identification of an individual not having someone check the work that was independent review of that work. And that was actually our CFO. From the time that was identified, processes were changed. And so all issues have now been resolved, all policies updated, and we feel comfortable that there will not be a repeat finding issue. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any specific questions.
Chancellor Broadwater, thank you for that. I'm not hearing any questions. Chancellor Wainwright, would you like to offer comment on audit findings?
Thank you, Chairman Spahn and members of the board. Dr. Sullivan did a tremendous job walking the committee through the uniqueness of circumstances. The only thing I'll add is it was actually two new campuses, both the Livingston campus and the Lacombe Advanced Technology Center opened at the exact same time in the fall of 2019. And there were no unlocated assets. We did extensive equipment purchases for two campuses 60 miles apart. And if we would have unpackaged and tagged a lot of property, we would have risked voiding warranties because we would not have been able to install the property. So we held off on tagging to ensure we didn't void our warranties. The second thing I'll add is we held off on tagging and unpackaging because we still had subcontractors in both buildings that would have left us vulnerable to potential loss of assets. And so we made the decision to hold and not install and unpackage until we had others off campus so we could be accountable. And so I would suggest that due to strong internal controls, we did not have any missing property as a result. And this will never happen again because this may never happen again where we're moving into two brand new buildings at the exact same time. So I just wanted to add that additional insight.
Thank you, Chancellor Wainwright. All right. I think we're pretty well wrapped up. Sounds like things are going pretty well on the audit side of things. Is there any other business or questions to come before the board?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make mention of something. I don't want to borrow trouble, but at the same time, I want to make sure this board is prepared for discussion that I suspect we will have over the next 10 to 12 months. As you are aware, the federal stimulus dollars that have come to the state of Louisiana in the form of the CARES Act and will likely come in the form of future stimulus dollars have a really unusual means by which they get to the state. First of all, it is not typical for the federal government to send down dollars in the form that is coming to us. And so there are a second factor that is impacting us right now is just volumes and volumes of detail about what you can and can't do with those dollars. We are having to work overtime to try to make sure that those dollars are spent in exactly the way they were intended. And in many instances, what you find with legislation that was put together in a very short period of time without considerations for conflicts, the federal guidance is in many instances at odds with one another. I do anticipate over the next year, we're going to be in a place with our friends at the Legislative Audit Shop, having conversations about whether these CARES Act dollars were spent according to the guidelines. And so I'm trying to get out ahead of this to make sure you understand. I can bet my bottom dollar that our 12 colleges are spending those CARES Act dollars on the right things. But I also want you to know that it is a task to try to figure out legislative intent from the federal government on something that was thrown together as quickly as the CARES Act was. So I'll continue to keep you posted on this front, and we look forward to kind of setting the standard for the rest of higher education in Louisiana as to how these dollars can and should be spent. The speed with which many of our colleagues in higher education spent those CARES Act dollars suggests to me that it's going to be a public discussion at some point. What I know about our colleges is we have been very conservative and very specific in how those dollars are spent. And we look forward to coming back to you at the appropriate time. And perhaps depending upon personnel and the amount of time we have available, this could be an area where we would like to ask Michael to help weigh in advance to make sure that we uncover any kinds of challenges that may be there in advance of having our friends at the Legislative Audit Shop take a look at those dollars. So just FYI, I wanted to give you a heads up of what's coming around the bend.
Monty?
Yes.
Have we initiated proactively sitting down with the legislative auditor just to ask for their guidelines or overview, so we can, so to speak, outthink them, because they're always looking for the worst, and we're trying to do everything right.
Yes.
From the examples you just about the two colleges, I think it's a perfect example. And again, I served on that committee for 12 years, so that would be, I think, something worth doing.
Yes. So I'll give you the example of Chris Broadwater at Louisiana Delta. When we got right to the end of the audit process at Delta, suddenly there were questions about CARES Act and how CARES Act dollars were spent. And so Chris did a tremendous job of working with that staff to make sure they understand the perspective of the colleges and then asking their perspective of what challenges they may have been pursuing. So while it's not a formal meeting with legislative audit to talk broadly about the 12, it was very helpful to have a chance to weigh in with the staff, and certainly Chris did a good job of that, given both his legislative background as well as leading the college. So, is anything to add to that? Okay, but we will certainly reach out to Daryl and his team and see if maybe we can sit down and just kind of talk through those.
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to go if you need me to.
Absolutely. We may very well think about that. And, this is a higher ed broad issue, right? This is not just an issue for us. And so this could be one where we want to have the Board of Regents involved with us to make sure that, everybody knows on the front end that this is according to whole.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you. Sarah, do we have any comment or input from the public on this?
Mr. Chairman, we have not received any requests for public comment.
Okay. Then I would request a motion to adjourn unless there's other business to come before the board.
The motion by Ms. Mount.
Seconded.
And a second by Ms. Mitchell. And before everyone hangs up, I would like to remind you that we have a 10 o'clock board meeting, and I will ask you to join by 9:50 if at all possible, so you have a little bit of a break, and I'll see you back in a few minutes.
Thank you.
It's the same call in.
Can I just suggest that the board, that this group recognized that the chairman made it through an entire meeting without a voice vote?
We did. We had one voice vote, Mr. President. We had one voice vote at the very beginning. We do not need a roll call vote to adjourn, but it's not the same link. Willie, if you look.
It's a different, okay.
If you look in your email that I sent yesterday morning, it's a different link.